everybody, and welcome back to the Drive Pink Dialogue. It has been an eventful week for a lot of teams around the world, but not for Inter Miami, who has yet to release their roster decisions. Lots of players still on the bubble. We do have a new coach officially. There will be news coming out of Javier Mascherano's mouth tomorrow. We're expecting to get the roster decisions soon. And there's lots of interesting things coming up this week, but so far, not that much. So I hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving break. And tonight we're going to be doing a top 20 draft to wrap up the 2024 season. Where did every player rise to, fall to? Where do they rank at the end of the season? But as always, I'm your host, Scotty. I'm here with my co-host, Saur. How are you feeling after a very long, hopefully relaxing holiday weekend? And you're on mute.
Great start to the episode. I was going to say, I think I feel a little bit too relaxed. I've had way too much free time on my hands and I just feel very lazy. So I'm glad that we have got back into this and I'm looking forward to a conversation. I know we've been planning this for a while and putting it off. We were hoping we would get some decisions from Inter Miami, but alas, the club doesn't like us as fans. So they're going to make us wait for as long as they can. So here we are with another episode, another fun draft episode. And as always, it's been proven that these episodes lead to some spicy conversations and some disagreements. So let's see what you've got for me this time around.
Yes, I am very interested to see what you're going to bring out with your number 3 pick this time, because that's always been the spiciest position in this draft. Before we do, though, I want to just mention a few things on the radar. Like I said, Javier Mascherano is going to have his introductory press conference tomorrow, so there'll probably be some quotes. We'll talk about that in our next episode. The roster decisions also supposedly coming out any day now. And then on Thursday, the Club World Cup draw is supposed to happen that day, and we're going to go live that night to talk about the Club World Cup draw, Mascherano, anything that happens in between. But that's sort of things to look out for on the schedule upcoming. And then also Orlando City lost. The Galaxy advanced the MLS Cup final out of the West and the New York Red Bulls out of the East, which means that regardless of who wins, there will be a former Heron lifting the MLS Cup this year. And considering it's not going to be the Herons lifting the cup, you got to feel good that at least a former Heron will be winning that trophy this season. But that's all I've got before we get into this draft. Is there anything on your mind that you want to mention before we get into it?
No, I think it's just consolation from us Inter Miami fans when it comes to watching the playoffs. Now, I haven't seen a single minute of the playoffs, but I've been keeping up with the results, and it seems like LA Galaxy is the favorite, which means that the way this playoffs has gone, it just goes to show New York Red Bulls is going to win, right? Now, it's going to be an exciting playoff final, and I'm waiting for that. But other than that, I think it's all quiet on the Western Front for Inter Miami. So let's get into the draft, man.
Okay, well, let's start by looking back at last time we did this, which was in June. I think we're going to have some interesting, updates, and we'll go back to this throughout the episode to kind of compare how players have gone up and down in our rankings. But the idea of this is, who are the best players in Inter Miami? And it's a mixture of talent and it's a mixture of production. It's not just potential; it's production and talent that sort of guides our rankings. The way we do this is one of us will go first, the other person will go second, back to third, back to fourth, back to fifth. So we'll do every other pick, and then the other person will do the opposite. Beyond that, normally we would take players out that have season-ending injuries or aren't going to be available for the rest of the season. And so in our last rankings, a player like Nico Frede was not available. We're going to put everyone back into the pot except for Facundo Farias, who did not play this year, so there's nothing really to go off of. And anyone that left during the season, guys like Schneider Borgelin, as the first names that come to mind. So that's the rules. That's the criteria. We're just going to go back and forth. And because I went first last time, I'm going to let you go first this time. And so as we're getting into this, tell me, who is your number 1 pick?
We've done this twice already, and this has been the most consistent and easy pick for every one of us. So I'm going to go with the same. Number 1, Lionel Messi. Absolutely phenomenal every time he takes the pitch. if I'd picked anybody else, the comments would have definitely got at me. So I don't think there's any debate here. I'm sure you would have picked him as well. If he played the entire season, he would have had a phenomenal output, probably doubling his entire goals and assist contributions for this entire season. But despite the fact that we only had him for basically half the season, he just produced some magical results. And it was unfortunate the way the playoffs ended for Inter Miami, because it could have definitely been a record-breaking season all across the board for Lionel Messi if he'd won the MLS Cup as well. He's my number one draft pick. We can't do anything without him on the pitch.
Yeah, I will just remind you, the first time we did this, you did not pick Lionel Messi with your first overall pick. But we'll move on from that. But yeah, 36 goal contributions. Those are true goal contributions. He had another 10 or so if you include sort of MLS hockey assist type goal contributions. 1.63 per 90. Only played 25 games, played less than 2,000 minutes. I mean, he's a superstar. And when he's on the field, this team can be unbelievably good, unbeatable. And it's just really fun that we get to have him on our team. So number one pick, no doubt about it.
All right.
Number two, and I think this one's also relatively easy, but tell me if you disagree on any of these picks, really. And that's Luis Suarez at number 2. 37 goal contributions, clearly played more minutes, but led the team in goals scored with 25. 2,800 minutes started, 31 games. Was a workhorse in a way that I don't think we thought was going to happen. I mean, when he was with the team, he didn't get a ton of injuries. He was healthy, and when he was healthy, he produced. He never went more than 3 games without a goal, and had like 6 or 7 multi-goal games this season. So I don't know what else you can say other than he was a star.
That's actually a really interesting stat that he never went 3 games without a goal. And it genuinely felt that way. More than 3 games, yeah. And it felt that way. It just felt like he was consistently scoring and getting the ball in the back of the net. And it just, I think, goes to show the kind of player Luis Suarez is. We constantly talk about how he may not be good over the course of 90 minutes, but he'll just produce something in that 1 minute that's going to change the nature of the game. So I did not have him, in fact, in the number 2 spot. But I'm not too averse to this because I had him as my number 3. My number 2 was, in fact, Sergio Busquets, because I think over the course of the entire season, Busquets proved the level of consistency that he brings, what he does to this team, and how much we miss him when he doesn't play, as we saw in the Atlanta game. So I'm going to go straight into my number 3 pick, which is going to be Sergio Busquets.
Yeah, my number 3 too, as well. He is the metronome. Obviously, when he goes out, this team is much worse. We saw that every time he left the field. He played as many minutes as anyone. Again, another workhorse, a guy that was never really injured aside from our most important playoff games, which we lost. And Inter Miami won a lot of games when he was on the field. Center back, defensive midfielder, he did it all, and he never missed a beat. So, again, just another player I'm just incredibly happy that we have on Inter Miami. Could have been an MVP-type player if he wasn't sort of overshadowed by Messi and Suarez this year.
And the best part about Sergio Busquets is you don't necessarily notice him when he's playing the game, right? It just feels like, okay, he's there on the pitch and he's doing his thing. But you actually miss him when he's not on the pitch. And you tend to realize what difference he actually makes when he's available and when he's not available. So for me, my reasoning to put him this high up, because I think this is the highest we've rated him perhaps, but I actually pushed him up to second in my list because I think he was absolutely brilliant and potentially as important as Lionel Messi, if not more so. So I could have gone with a very controversial number 1 pick with Sergio Busquets because I had half mine to do that. But I think number 2, number 3 is a good spot for these 3 players.
Was he closer to Messi than Suarez for you?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it became a lot more clear towards the end. Just because he's been so consistent, I don't think he had one poor performance throughout the entire season. Okay, maybe at the start of the season, yes, we had a couple of games where he was still getting up to speed. But if you see the latter half of the season, he's potentially the most consistent player we've had, barring Messi, who constantly produces 9-star performances. So, yeah, I think he was closer to Messi than Luis Suarez.
For the record, Sergio Busquets was our number 5. And the first time we did this, moved up to number 4. The second time we did this, it is now up to number 3. Messi and Suarez were the 1 and 2 each time that we did this. My number 4 pick, and I'm going to go right back to chalk, is Jordi Alba. He's a superstar, man. And even though he does have games, I think more than he is given criticism for, where he kind of has a poor game, when he's right, he is unbelievable. Best left back in MLS history, no doubt about it. 15 goals this year. I'm sorry, 15 assists this year, 5 goals. Again, a superstar MVP type performance. Almost won the Defender of the Year, despite the fact that he is known for his offensive output. Just a superstar, and definitely deserves the number 4 spot, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think everything I've just said about Sergio Busquets, Luis Suarez, Lionel Messi can possibly be replicated for Jordi Alba as well. Great player, best left back in the league. I'm not even sure what we can say apart from should have won the Defender of the Year. And it is absolutely incredible how much offensive engagement he has in games, because his numbers are unreal. Another controversial pick from my side. I had him.
Hold on. So this was not your top 4.
This was
I wanted to ask
not
that.
my top 4.
Okay.
But I think our top 5 was the same, because who I had in number 5 was Yannick Bright. And for me, my thinking throughout this process was I'm drafting players who've had the maximum amount of impact or maximum amount of improvement. And yes, Jordi Alba has been phenomenal, a better player than Yannick Bright by all means. But I think in terms of how much Bright has improved over the course of the season and what he does to this team in terms of offering that defensive midfield role to this team that we don't have anywhere else, and just, again, consistently performing at a very, very high level, constantly dropping 7, 8-star performances. There wasn't a single moment this season where I was like, damn, Yannick Bright let me down. And I think just for that, he deserves to round off the top 5. I'm not sad having him as number 5 and not number 4. I think there was a very, very close call for my end as well. It was a toss-up between Alba and Yannick Bright for that 4 and 5 spot, but I think these 5 definitely deserve to be in that top 5, because for me, they're always going to be the first people I pick in my starting 11.
You make a lot of great points. He was my number 5, and I would have picked him next if you hadn't. The consistency of quality is hard to ignore. I will say we've had Busquets, Messi, Alba, and Suarez as 4 of our top 5 in every time we've done this. But that 5th spot, well, the 3rd spot before this, once was Robert Taylor, then was Diego Gomez. Now it's Yannick Bright, but it does feel appropriate with the way Diego Gomez sort of moved out of position. Robert Taylor dropped off from consistent minutes, and Yannick Bright was just so talented, so consistent that he was locked in whenever he was available and healthy. So, and then again, when we missed him in the playoffs, we really missed him. And so I think this makes a lot of sense, and it's exactly what I would have done. And I also thought there was a drop off from here. These 5 felt easy to me, and then it was a little bit more difficult. With pick number 6, I am going with Diego Gomez because of what he did early on in the season. He's still very good as a left winger, but I am really combining what he did both as a midfielder and averaging it with what he did as a left winger. And that brings him down a little bit in my book. I think he finished with 9 goals. And so it was a very solid season for him. He did a significant amount, rather, Diego Gomez, 6 goals. I apologize. He had a really good season. He earned himself a move to the Premier League, but down the stretch, playing out of position, I was disappointed, not from what he did, but that he was in that spot and he wasn't able to impact the game as much as he could. And so for me, that slides him down the rankings a little bit.
Yeah, and I was really surprised at how I was thinking about Diego Gomez throughout this process, because I also had him as my number 6. And a lot of that has to do with his performances during the first half of the season, right? In the second half of the season, I don't think his performance level dropped, and he was still one of the better performers on the pitch every time he was on and every time he started the game. But it was just a bit of a gulf between his first half performances and his second half performances.
And that injury, right? He left for about 2 months, and when he came back, he started playing as a left winger, and then he wasn't quite as he went all out still, but he was no longer going 90 minutes all out. And there was a drop off. And I think that's
He
reflected
was
here.
an absolute beast, a bull on that field when he was playing before that injury. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that he played as a central midfielder at that time. So he was responsible for engaging with the ball a lot more rather than carrying the ball forward on that left wing side and trying to create offensive opportunities, which is ironic because I think he created more offensive opportunities in the central midfield position
I agree.
than he did from that left wing spot. So I don't think it was a drop off in level of performances. It was just a sort of drop off in output. And just because of that, I think number 6 is good for him.
So
Overall, a very good season.
So Gomez, the first time we did this, was ranked 6th after an incredibly promising start to the season.
Yeah.
But we really fully believed by the second time we did this, and I picked him at number 3 because I thought he was having that type of monster impact in the midfield. And so this does represent a little bit of a drop off, but it's back to where he was at the very beginning of the season. And I think that's appropriate.
Yeah. I don't think it represents a downward trend, but rather a maintenance of his trajectory this season. All right, as my number 7 pick, and I'm sure you're going to disagree with me on this, I went with Drake Callender, and I think you made a really good point about how the top 5 or even 6, I think, up until Diego Gomez, it was quite easy to pick the top 5. And then after that, I really struggled, and I changed it around a fair few times. I put Callender in 10, I put him in 8, I put him in 9. And then I thought about it, and I think he deserves to be recognized for what he's done for this club this season. I know he comes under a lot of stick for sometimes having a little bit of an off day, maybe not being the best in terms of his ball playing abilities. But overall, I think he was very, very solid in goal and came up with some incredible saves. And I always go back to that penalty save that he had against Columbus. And for me, that was one of the brighter moments of the season. I am happy to argue why I've put him here, but I can completely understand why you would put him lower as well. But for me, I think he had a really good season, solid and quality throughout, albeit sometimes he was a little bit off here and there.
Yeah, so I think when we get to Callender, he's good and solid. And it's just a matter of how many players you think are very good or special or elite or, in those types of categories. And if you want to say that stops at these first 6 that we had, I'm okay with that. I will say I had him significantly lower. I had him 13th on my list, but that doesn't, like you said, that doesn't mean it's a huge gap between where we are now at 7 and where I had him at 13.
Yeah.
To me, the next
think
about
that gap
7 picks
between-
are similar.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And it's literally fractions that separate the next few that I'm going to talk about, because for me, either could be up or either could be below. And again, I struggled a lot. I changed it around a few times, and this was the one that I was most comfortable with. But the drop off in quality from 6 to 7 is quite visible. And then from 7 till about 14, I think it's very, very close. So I don't think it represents accurately calling it a number 13 or number 14. I think it's more to do with the closeness of our quality in players.
Yeah, the first time we did this, Drake Callender was 7th. Then he dropped to 9th, but then back at 7th. So very consistent. And I think that's consistently above average play is what Drake Callender has been this year. And so I think this is appropriate. Okay, my 8th pick, I'm going a little off the board, small sample size, but I'm going with Ian Frey, who was an X factor every time he was on the field. If he played in a game for more than like 6 minutes at the very end, he had an impact on the game. Goal threat, dangerous going forward, defensively solid, aside from, I believe he had 1 defensive mistake this entire season. Heartbreaking that he is injury prone, but he is a stud. And I wanted this ranking to reflect that.
Yeah, 100%. And you said it completely. The reason I have him lower, and I believe I have him in 13th. So the reason I had him lower was the sample size, man. I didn't think he played enough games to warrant being pushed up to that higher level. But again, I really wanted to place him at least in the top 10. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. But listen, if he was able to perform regularly and if he got the opportunities, first of all, to consistently play that right back role, I do not doubt at all that he'd make the top six. He was just that good every time he was on the pitch. I just think the sample size was a little small and unfortunate the way the season ended for him. But too good of a player to ignore, man. And I don't mind this. I don't mind this at all.
Yeah, actually, for the record, I had him seventh. So I had him I had him at the bottom of that sort of first through sixth list, right near Diego Gomez. And then it was a little bit of a drop off.
And my consideration was mostly to do with because we were taking into account the whole season. I thought it might have been a little bit unfair to put him ahead of some of the other players who had played a little bit more than Ian Frey. But yeah, he's just that good, man. And I can't wait to see him back in action.
I know. And again, we'll say this every time he ever comes back, but just if he can stay healthy forever, he'll be a great player for Inter Miami. Okay, pick number 9 to you.
This one is Toto Aviles. And again, I went a little bit left field here. And I thought to myself when I was thinking about Aviles as a player, what did I actually take back from reviewing his performances every time I saw him, right? And the first thing that came to mind was on first watch, he seemed very poor. On second watch, he was much better than I thought he would be. And I think if you actually take into account the whole season and how he performed across the board, across 30 odd games, I think he had a really good season. And if not for some of the daft things that he does in getting yellow cards and red cards sometimes, we would have probably been talking about Aviles in a lot more positive light than we did. Every time we had some defensive issues, it wasn't him who was at fault. And I think maybe a couple of defensive errors barring, he was quite solid this entire season. So for me, I think he makes the top 10, and I put him in the 9th spot because I thought he was quite good this season and deserves to be recognized in that sense.
Yeah, I hear you. It's your pick, so I'm okay with it, but I had him quite a bit lower. I think there's some players with real talent that have a step up in terms of their talent, even if the consistent production wasn't always there. So for me, I had him at 14th. He's a little bit lower down my list, but again, I think a lot of these guys in this range are in a similar mode, so I'm not going to crucify you too much for it, which does lead me to pick number 10. And I went with Matthias Rojas. He's the lefty with the silky left foot. He's got it when he's got it. He has the X factor, right? When he's having an impact, it is incredible. We saw him connect with Messi and do some incredible things in the middle part of the season. He had some great shots from distance that sort of blew your socks off. And so the peak of what Matthias Rojas is and can be is that X factor specialness. Was not consistent, especially as the longer he spent in Inter Miami, those moments became less frequent. But I still think those extra special moments, that extra gear he has, puts him a little bit higher for me. I had him as my 8th pick, but he lands here at number 10 because I do think he has that little extra something.
Yeah, I was very surprised by this. And I think we largely maintain a very similar draft other than Matthias Rojas, who's quite far off from your list compared to mine. I had him as my number 17. And the interesting thing is, your reasoning and my reasoning for that are very similar. So, yes, Rojas has that X factor. But again, I spent some time thinking about how I felt about the player. And I just wanted more, man. I just wanted that level of consistency on a regular basis. And it just felt like, okay, he played 16 games, 10 games, I think he started in the MLS. And it just felt like he produced only a handful of those special moments that you spoke about. Whereas I thought that he was capable of a lot more. And it just felt a little bit disappointing and underwhelming thinking about Rojas and how his season progressed. Even in the playoffs, when we thought that he should have had some sort of impact, I think his impact was limited to that New York Red Bull game and that one free kick, I believe, against Montreal. Maybe. Yeah. And other than that, I can't remember a single moment where he took the game by the scruff of its neck and made a difference. And for me, that was a big reason why I put him so far down the pecking order because I just wanted more from him. And yeah, I felt like he could have been more consistent.
Yeah, I think you're comparing him to your expectations a little too much and judging him a little harshly. I
Yeah,
think
maybe.
if he was consistent in some of those ways that we wish he was, this is a guy who could have been a top 5 player, because he has that special sort of skill set. He did come third in the team behind Messi and Suarez in terms of goals, 9 goals. He did sign on
He
April
had
23rd.
9 goals.
9 goals. He signed on April 23rd, so he missed the first 10 or so games of the regular season. So, considering the fact that he missed basically half the season based on signing late and then going to the Copa America, still was third in the team in goals scored. I think that, was he not everything he promised with those little glimpses? That's true. But I still think he was a really good player for Inter Miami. And again, 9 goals for being the third option and being a guy that didn't really have a position at any point this season that was locked in for him, constantly moving positions, coming off the bench, etc. I think that's really, really impressive. So I had him in the, number 8.
So we've got to number 10. And one question that comes to mind is, how much of this do you think is a result of the players' performances, which I think should be the larger metric that we judge them by? But also, as you just mentioned, Matthias Rojas didn't necessarily have a fixed role in this team. And how much of it should we consider Tata Martino's role in not getting the best out of the players? Because I think we could do an entire podcast of how did Tata Martino manage these players and which ones did he manage well and which ones did he manage poorly. And for me, I think Matthias Rojas was one of the players that he could have managed slightly better in terms of giving him a specific role on this team. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I may be disappointed in Matthias Rojas' performances at times, but some of it might have to do with the fact that he didn't actually have a proper role on this team and the coaching staff didn't get the best out of them. So that's an entire other conversation. But anyways, moving on to the next one. And number 11 for me is Noah Allen. Very positive, very, very positive for me. I thought his performances towards the end of that season were possibly amongst the best performances that any Inter Miami player produced. He was flawless. And I watched a couple of highlights when I was doing this because I wanted to remind myself what the players did. And I went back, watched a couple of highlights of Noah Allen's games because I was a little bit confused where to place him exactly. And I was like, he needs to be high up on this list just because I think he was one of the players who showed insane amount of progression in terms of his quality, in terms of his development. And we're basically judging players on how they perform throughout the season, but also comparing it to our previous draft list. And for me, I don't think there's any other player on this list who's outperformed his ability or our perception of him than Noah Allen.
Again, you had him way higher than I did. I had him 18th on my list. He had 5 or 6 incredibly impressive performances at the end. But in terms of like pure talent and then also production, I think this is, to me, he was behind this sort of solid starter list and sort of down a little bit. So to me, this is really high, but that's okay. Listen, no player jumped more than Noah Allen from list to list to list. He was 19th in our first list, but that was before Yannick Bright was eligible, Leo Alfonso was eligible, Chelo Wigan and Matthias Rojas were eligible, David Martinez wasn't eligible. So there was a lot of guys that would have made that first list if they were on the team yet, and he finished 19th. So he probably would have been pushed out of that first list. He didn't make our second list in the top 20 when we did this in June, and now jumping all the way to 11. Big jump, but you are right. Those 5 or 6 games were incredible, incredibly promising, and he stepped up when the team needed him to. So, and ultimately, he outplayed David Martinez in the last month and a half.
And that was my consideration, like exactly my consideration. The quality, it wasn't just the fact that he showed improvement, but the quality of performances that he put in. I don't think anybody expected that from him. And it was over the course of 6-7 games, which is a big stretch of games to consistently perform. So yeah, a case to be made that maybe he should have been lower. 18th, I think, is a little bit harsh, but I would have definitely pushed him up a little bit, maybe up to 15. But hey, I had the 11th spot open and I wanted to give him to Noah Allen.
And that is your right. And we'll see next year if I have to make fun of you for it or if you get to make fun of me for having him so low. Pick number 12. I've completely forgotten where my list is. Pick number 12. I'm going with Leo Campana. I would have had him much higher. I think I had him 9th. He's so talented and he just doesn't get the minutes to prove it. But on a goal per minute basis, he is elite. We did the math on some of this. There's like 7 strikers in the entire MLS that score more goals per minute or more goals per 90 or whatever. Like on a per minute basis are more effective and efficient than him. He is so talented and it's a shame we don't see more of him, but I think he deserves to be high on this list because I very much enjoy Leo Campana's game.
Yeah, when we were doing those statistics, he outperformed practically half the strikers of any team that we started putting forward. So
more than that, most strikers we looked at.
I think there were 2 of them who were probably better than him in terms of goals per minute. I had him at a very similar spot. I had him at number 11, so higher than what we have him right now. And I completely agree with you. I think he was not given the opportunity to actually showcase his talent, which is fine because we have Luis Suarez and his role this season was not meant to be a starting striker. And there were instances during the season when we needed him to come on and do something for this team. And he did that. He brought out a goal out of nothing. His first touch against DC United was an absolute banger, worthy of a goal. Twice.
Yeah, Toronto too.
Yeah, Toronto as well. And that was for our points record when he pulled that off. And it just goes to show that there is quality there. There is talent there. I think if you give him more minutes, he's definitely going to shine and become this diamond that we know that he is. Now, selfishly speaking, I want him to stay on for next season, but I'm not sure if he gets the same or if he gets the level of minutes that he deserves and the development that he needs to go through. I don't know if it can happen at Inter Miami. So even though selfishly,
let's hold that conversation for another time.
Yeah,
he did get 1,500 minutes this year, 15 starts, 20 bench appearances, 9 goals, 2 assists. So on the whole, you have to feel at least relatively good. Maybe a couple hundred more minutes, but it is what it is. Anything else on Campana, or are you ready for pick number 13?
No, I'm ready for my pick number 13, and that is Federico Redondo. I think he was one of those players for me where I thought he was average, and I had him slightly higher on my list. I had him around 10th, and I was fine with that because for me, number 10 represents Federico Redondo. He's not among the top 10, but he's not among the bottom 10. He's just average. He's just there. He did his thing. He was good, not phenomenal. That's about it, right?
I actually also had him number 10. So it's interesting that he fell to number 13. But this is who I would have taken next. He's fallen on this list. The first time we did this, he was 8. The second time he was 7. Now he's down to 13. I think the first 2 times we did this, it was a little bit more projection, which isn't really what we're trying to do here. But we'd only seen him a couple times that first time, and then he got injured. Probably was still injured during that second time. Once we got a full run of games from him, I think our expectations dropped a little bit. Some of the holes in his game that take more than one viewing to really see started to become apparent. So I think it's appropriate that he drops a couple spots, but still a very talented player that hopefully can harness that with a good, proper offseason in Miami, similar to how Diego Gomez did it last year. So big expectations, but in terms of right now talent, and especially in terms of right now production, I think this is the appropriate place to have him.
And listen, this is going on record. So we're going to have this draft for next season when we do the draft the first time around. And it'll be really interesting to see how that comes out, because I do think there's potential for him to actually have a proper starting role on this team and have an impact. He's played with Yannick Bright now, knows the system well. Well, the system's probably going to change with Mascherano coming in, but knows Mascherano, knows the coach, and he's just going to be that much more comfortable, right? And I think there's room for improvement here. completely agree with you. We at the first time that we did the draft, we judged him in terms of what he's going to bring to the team, and it's a little bit unfair that he's fallen to 13, even though both of us had him on number 10. But that's the nature of the draft. So hopefully next year he can do much better.
Yeah, I think everything you just said was exactly right, and maybe working with Mascherano, they have a connection, and he can get the best out of Redondo. So you can see him being a guy that skyrockets up this list next year, no doubt about it. Okay, pick number 14. I'm going with Julian Gressel because he's a player that has real talent, and his fit might not be perfect for this Inter Miami team, and I will happily acknowledge that. But in terms of raw talent, I think he's got it. I had him number 11, so this is right. I had him right after Redondo, so this is sort of right where it's supposed to be. This is Julian Gressel, man. He's a good player. Didn't ever really find the perfect fit for him other than when Messi was at Copa America.
Yeah, I had Gressel lower, and my reasoning for that was I remember the frustrations that we had from him or from Tata Martino when he continuously played in that first half of the season, and he just didn't perform that well. Cut to the second half of the season after Messi. I feel like we divide the season before Messi and after Messi, right? And there's a period in between where we didn't have Messi at all. So once we went through that period of no Messi in this team, he truly showed what quality he brings, and fantastic MLS quality player. I would say he's above average MLS quality player. When he's on the pitch and knows what he's supposed to do, he's very, very effective and can do a really good job. But for me, I think over the course of the entire season, Gressel, not to a fault of his own, but I feel like he never found his true footing in this team, never found his place on this team. And for that reason, I placed him slightly lower. It was 16, so more close to what we're reflecting here on this draft. But I think you had him higher, which is fine. I can understand that. But I think over the course of the season, he was, again, he left a little bit wanting.
Yeah, and I think we saw the talent during the brief period he was used to his best ability, and throughout most of the rest of the season it wasn't. So this is more of a talent ranking than a production ranking. Although he did finish with 10 assists, which is not too shabby. I will say 14th this time. He was 14th last time. So
consistent. There you go. Yeah. And that's actually not bad at all, Like, yes, as you mentioned, we're ranking players, but if your level hasn't dropped off, that's not too bad either. So I would take that as a positive if I were Julian Gressel.
I will say, though, the last time we did this was before he went off in late June and early July. So,
and it's unfortunate that we saw very little of him when he actually started doing really well, right? Because I would have expected him to start more games because Tata Martino just wanted a reason to start him. And that's the daftness of Tata Martino, that when his player actually started to perform, he dropped him, which makes no sense. So,
and Gressel's his guy too. So
exactly, his player, yeah. As number 15, I'm going to take Benjamin Kramaski, and this is one of those players that has fallen on the similar spot that I had him on my list. I had him 14, so slightly higher, but I'm not too mad that he's in number 15. I thought he had a really good end to the season and really showed some quality moments. I don't remember how many goal contributions he had, but I just think compared to what he was last season, there was a little bit of a drop off in terms of, his impact on this team. But that's understandable given that this is still a 19-year-old player who's going through his development phase, and he's going to still develop further. And I've spoken about Benha a lot in terms of the context that he's in, right? He has all these great players around him and these expectations that this 19-year-old is going to go out and blow the water out of the opposition every time he goes on the pitch. You can't expect that from a player who's just 19 and still developing. Consistency isn't always there. So it was understandable that he didn't have the best of seasons compared to last, but I still think he had a very positive season, and especially the ending to that season, I thought he did really, really well and got a good few goal contributions throughout the season.
It felt like his best moments when he was consistently playing.
Yeah.
And there were times where he would get 3 or 4 starts in a row, and those were like his best periods of run. I will say the first time we did this, he came in at 14th. Now he's 15th. But the second time he came in at 8th. We had a lot of faith in him. So, and I think you were the one who picked him at 8th. So, a little bit of a drop off, but again, the talent's there. And also this 7 through 15, 7 through 14, I think is clouded. I will say I did have one player, and he'll be my next pick, that I think was definitely above Kremasky. I had him a little bit higher. And so I'll just go to it. And that's David Martinez, who I understand people are going to reflect poorly on him because of the last 2 games of the season. Even maybe the last 3 games of the season. He had that groin injury, and he wasn't quite the same after that. But the way he can spray the ball around, the way he's so comfortable on the ball, the way he can get forward, even though I don't always love it when we are protecting him, but just the talent you can see is real. The tools are real. And I think next year when he's here for a whole season, if he's the starter game in and game out, we're going to see a really positive David Martinez, assuming he can stay healthy consistently. And so for me, I thought he obviously belonged on this first part of the list. I had him at number 12, but I'm happy with him here at 16. I feel like I got a bargain.
I struggled so much with David Martinez here because this was one player that I think I struggled the most with. I put him up number 10, then I pulled him down, then I brought him back up, then I brought him back down. I think he ended up number 15 on my list, so very close to where we have him right now. But you said it exactly right. I think it's slightly unfair to judge him just by the end that he had to the season. And unfortunate that it was one of the most important games of our season where he didn't perform up to the mark and had those couple of errors. Overall, he's such a fantastic player, really comfortable with the ball and very exciting to watch. And up until that Atlanta series, it never felt like he was in any trouble as a defender. And I almost feel like if you put him in the right system, he's going to absolutely, run the show. I don't know how the defense is going to shape up next season, but I think there's definitely potential for him at least to be a very good quality backup option or even challenge for a starting position. Because as you said, he came back from a groin injury, did not have too much time to settle into the team. Let's be honest. He was brought on after Nico Freire had that injury. Then he got injured himself. And after that, it was basically every single game was do or die. And he stepped up when we needed him to, barring that last game. But overall, I think very promising player, exciting times. And I'm glad that he's here until June because I wouldn't want his Inter Miami tenure to end the way it did. Because I do think there's more that he can do for this team. And I'm excited to see him because I think he's going to start the season at least. Even if he's not the starting option center back, I do think he's going to have a role to play at the start.
And I don't think I want to make a decision on keeping him permanently now. I want to see him a little bit more because we only got him for a handful of games, right? He only started 10 games. So, it's not a huge sample size. I will say he was my number 1 defender in terms of talent. You clearly had both Aviles and Noah Allen ahead of him, not defender, center back. So that I think maybe the most strange of our disagreements on this, but yeah, David Martinez, 16, 17th pick to you.
As my 17th pick for the 2024 draft number 3 for the Drive Pink Dialogue, I'm going to pick the best right back in the league, and that is Marcelo Wiegand. That was a sweeping statement from me at the start of the season, and I would like to apologize to every single Inter Miami fan out there who listens to this podcast because I jumped the gun slightly early. I had him slightly higher on the list just because of his consistency. He was consistently decent. And another one of those players who's very similar to Redondo in terms of his impact on this team. Wasn't bad, wasn't too poor. There was a run of, I think, 4 or 5 games where Ian Frey was challenging for that right back role, and you could tell that every time Wiegand was on the pitch, we were seeing some of the errors that he was making, and he didn't have the best of games. He picked himself up, got back into decent form, and performed at a well enough level, a solid MLS level. But I think unlike Redondo, he has a ceiling that is it, right? I don't think he's going to give you anything more than he's already had. And for that reason, I think consistency wise, he was good, but I'm happy to keep him 17th, honestly.
There's a drop off here to me. I thought I have one more player before Cello that we haven't gotten to yet that I'll get to, that who will be my next pick. But after Kremaski, after David Martinez, after the player I'm going to take next, I thought there was a break, and then it got to the guys who are just solid. And Cello's one of those, and he just happens to start the majority of games because of his position. But I thought almost everyone else in the starting lineup, Calendar, Aviles, Campana, Redondo, Gressel, like there's something you really like about them. And then that stops. And then you get Cello, who's just consistent, solid, but not something to get excited about. So I'm fine with him here. I actually had him 17th on my list. I just have one player ahead of him, but that's sort of where I'm at with Cello. I don't want to project if he's going to come back or not, but that'll be for another time. Hopefully we find out soon. Pick number 18. I'm going with Robert Taylor, who's my last guy ahead of Cello. I think when Robert Taylor plays, he is good. And I like watching Robert Taylor play, and I think he has a positive impact on the games. Clearly, he fell out of favor. Clearly, this roster and the coaching staff felt they weren't at their best when Robert Taylor was on the field. So he fell off in terms of playing time, but good player. And I think he's got real talent.
I'm going to start shedding a tear if I talk too much about Robert Taylor. This is potentially the biggest drop-off that we have on this list, I think.
It is. The first time we did this, you took him third, ahead of Jordi Alba, Sergio Busquets, Diego Gomez. The second
I would
time we
take
did
him number one, man. I would still take him number one.
The second time we did this, he only fell to sixth. And that, I think, shows the drop off in terms of his production and mostly game time between June and now.
I was
the second
gonna
half of the
say,
season wasn't his.
I'm going to need you to use some of your Photoshop skills and add a little asterisk at the end of Robert Taylor, because this isn't a reflection of Robert Taylor as a player and how he performed for Inter Miami. This is a reflection of him not getting minutes. And fine, I understand that Diego Gomez was in front of him. Diego Gomez was the better player this entire season, but I refuse to believe that if Robert Taylor was given a consistent run of games, he would not have continued to contribute, because after 2 or 3 games that he did even come on, he had an assist and I think goal as well. So I don't think his output would have dropped if he'd got the game time. And for me, it's not Robert Taylor as a player and his ability. It's just to do with the fact that he fell out of favor with the coaching staff for some reason or another. And unfortunately, I think this is the end of Robert Taylor's time at Inter Miami. Maybe that changes with the new coach, but a big drop off for Robert Taylor from the number 3 that I'd placed him in that first draft. And I'm very sad that happened. But it is what it is, man. This is football.
Yeah, and I think for both of us, he was a locked-in top 10 player up until he signed his contract extension.
I would say even if he played after his contract signing, I still think he would have made top 10. I just think he has that quality. And there was no change in quality with him.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, pick number 19 to you.
I'm going to go with David Ruiz. And at this time in my list, I was floundering a little. As you mentioned, we've now reached a stage where it's mostly the players on the periphery. And honestly, you could take David Ruiz out and put anybody else in. I don't even know what to say too much. I thought he had a couple of really good games when he played, when he was given the opportunity, but we didn't see too much of him. For me, David Ruiz is going to be remembered for that Monterrey game this entire season. And I think he's a good bench player. He's a good depth piece, but I don't think he's ever going to be a starter, at least until we have the level of quality that we do in our midfield. And for that matter, I'm going to put him 19. I know you might not even have him on your list.
You just explained why he doesn't belong on the list and then rated him 19.
I didn't think anybody else deserved to be in 19th spot from all the players that are left. So I gave it to David Ruiz, man.
Interestingly, I feel better about David Ruiz's future. I think he can be sort of a third or fourth midfielder for this team moving forward. But, he still has a year or two to grow to get to that point. And it was a solid season. He's a young player that has some real promise. Honduran international, playing a lot of games for his country. So good, solid player. I didn't have him in my top 20, but 19th is fine. I think we're sort of splitting hairs here.
Yeah.
And then number 20, which wraps up our draft, and then we'll do some dissecting. I gave it to Nico Freire, who off the radar, hasn't played in a long time. Tore his ACL, I believe, in April, maybe, probably May. But was a real MLS caliber starter. And so not a standout, just a solid player. Had some good games, had some bad games, but big in the box, was good on set piece defense, which we really needed earlier in the year. So I gave it to Nico Freire as a sort of ode to him, as he probably won't be back with the team, but just a reminder that he's here, and we didn't forget about him and his contributions to this team. I'm giving him the number 20 spot. Anything on Nico Freire?
I'm actually very surprised, but also glad that you gave Nico Freire that, because I overlooked him. My number 20 for your preference was Leo Afonso, just because I feel like it was more recency bias than anything else. And I felt slightly more happy thinking about Leo Afonso's contributions in that Philadelphia game than Nico Freire. But yeah, it's actually really sad that Nico Freire got injured when he did, because I thought he was doing really well in that defense. And I don't know if David Martinez coming in and replacing Freire was a positive or a negative. I don't want to talk about that. But in terms of his contributions to this team, he was a really good player, very good, solid MLS level defender. And yeah, we didn't have that defensive transition cover that we were hoping a player of his quality would bring in. But I don't think he played too many games with Yannick Bright in that midfield. So I would have really liked to see. I would have really liked to see him with that defensive midfield cover in front of him of Yannick Bright. And I think he would have really thrived in that. And it almost felt like Nico Freire and Toto Aviles were developing a sense of chemistry, and they were complementing each other. And it just all fell apart once Freire got injured. So that was really sad.
Yeah, it felt like after the Monterrey series, for the next like 10 games or so, we saw a noticeable improvement in the defense, and Nico Freire was a big part of that. So, yeah, I wanted to give him his credit. Leo Afonso, another guy that I think could be on this list. He was actually our number 20 guy last time, but Freire wasn't available. Sorry, Christoph was 17th, then 18th, not on the list. Franco Negri was 16th, then 17th, then not on the list. Ryan Saylor potentially could have been an option. Lawson Sunderland, Oscar Ustadi. I didn't really give those guys too much consideration for the top 20, but other guys that I think if you have them as your 24th through 26th best players on your team, you feel pretty good about your roster. Anyone here that really surprises you?
Where their position is?
Yeah.
Robert Taylor. No, I think
it's crazy. I mean, we've talked about how crazy it is, but he just disappeared.
And I think we can do an entire episode on Robert Taylor, and we probably will do an entire episode on Robert Taylor when that announcement comes through. But I think that is the biggest drop off, and the biggest. I don't think that was a surprise in any way when we were drafting this, even before we put this together. I think I said it to you that Robert Taylor is going to have the biggest fall in the history of top 20 drafts for Driving Dialogue. So very, very surprising, very sad, but it is what it is. I'm looking at this list, not surprised, but pleasantly happy that you and I both had Yannick Bright complete our top 5, because that just goes to show the level of player that he is. Wasn't there in that first draft. In that second draft, I don't remember where he placed, but number 5 is
16th.
I think number 5 is he's one player that I'm really comfortable putting up that high, right? Because sometimes you can have this sense that, oh, he's a new player, rookie season. Do you actually put him in your top 5? I'm very comfortable with that.
And I don't think we would get much of an argument. Someone might say Diego Gomez is better, but other than that,
no. In terms of impact, I don't think so.
Yeah, I would be surprised if anyone argued that these 6 weren't the 6. Can I just, the first time we did this, a couple games into the season, Do you want to guess who I had at number 18? Who I took at number 18?
Lawson Sunderland.
I took him at number 20.
Oh, Benha.
Robbie Robinson.
Oh, yeah.
I thought he was going to come back at some point and be, a nice compliment to Robert Taylor, and that never happened. This season was a good year for a lot of these guys. Robert Taylor, I think, is the most obvious example of that not being the case. Maybe Julian Gressel too, but Noah Allen, great season. Toto Aviles, I think you have to feel really good about where he ended up. Ian Frey, obviously the injury, but when he was on the field, it was incredible. And then Yannick Bright, more so than anyone. Just tremendous. And then I really wanted to compliment the top 4 guys, the Barcelona boys, because there's a lot of DP players that were stars in Europe that came to the MLS. Olivier Giroud being the most notable this summer, that came in and didn't have the type of impact that people thought that they were going to have. And so for all 4 of our sort of quote unquote superstars to come in and be game team leaders, game wreckers, game changers, whatever, I think that is really nice.
Yeah, and it's almost as though you can lock that 4 in, and it's going to be the case every single time we do a draft in the season.
Oh, this is the first time it's been like this, though.
Not to my fault.
No, you picked Robert Taylor.
Hey, you picked Diego Gomez as number 3, so don't blame me entirely.
I stand by that one. I stand by that one.
But if we start this draft from the 4th or 5th position, I don't think anyone's going to complain too much. And it just goes to show the level that these boys played at when they did, and the fact that they're continuing to perform at this level. Sergio Busquets is how, 37, 38? That's incredible. If I can move like that at 38, I'll be very happy with myself. Playing at, let's say, elite level still is insane. So, yeah, slightly underwhelming in the sense that we were hoping we would get further in the playoffs. But you know what? We have the next season, and it is what it is. Don't cry over spilt milk. Overall, I thought a very successful season for a lot of these players, and I take back good positive memories from it.
Yes. Before we go, guys, I see your questions in the chat. Oftentimes I kind of put them up, but we don't answer them just because it's not in the flow of the sort of podcast. We also have listeners that only listen to it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever. So I don't want to bring in something unless we can make it obvious for everyone. But I do want to go back now that we're at the end of the draft and get your takes on some of these. Rock says, it feels like the training sessions aren't as sharp as they could be this season. What's your take on
that? We haven't seen the actual training sessions as such. And I don't want to judge based on just a few video clips that they put out and the public training sessions that they do, because that's not the sign of what's happening behind the scenes. I don't think players like Messi, Busquets, Jordi Alba need that high intensity training anyways. I think the training is more so for the rest of the squad. But I don't want to speculate about something that I didn't have eyes on. So I'll just say I'm fine with the training sessions.
Yeah, I also don't know. They won the supporter shield. I don't know. I think they were doing a lot of good things. But MK says, do you guys think Drake will be gone?
I don't know, man. I've stopped thinking about who's going to stay and who's not going to stay, because honestly, my bingo card is absolutely screwed. I think he stays. That's not a priority position for Inter Miami. I think he stays.
I think he stays too, but I think we'll learn something tomorrow when Mascherano gets in front of the mic. These are the type of questions, how they want to build the roster, that I think he might get. I don't know if he's going to do like 10 minutes or if he'll do like 30. But I think that'll be interesting to see what he has to say tomorrow. Is Gomez leaving, says Michael, for the Premier League? That is the plan. He's supposed to go to Brighton in January for $18.5 million US.
Have you seen any news on that? Because
I think it's a done deal. They just Brighton wants to put it on this transfer window instead of the last transfer window, but I think that one's a done deal. How can Busquets and Redondo play at the same time, says Rock? And Francisco says Mascherano likes to play a double CDM line. Who knows if he will use it in Miami? 2 relevant points. Tata Martino in the first playoff game played 3 defensive midfielders in the midfield, in Busquets, Redondo, and Bright. And I loved it, and I thought it worked really well. And then Busquets got hurt, and then Bright got hurt, and then our midfield fell apart. That trio feels like it could be the midfield for Mascherano next year, with mixing in a 10 when you need it. But in the big games, it feels like those three.
If we recruit well in the centre back position, I don't see Sergio Busquets playing in that role. I would actually really like a good quality centre back so that Sergio Busquets can be pushed higher up the pitch. And with Yannick Bright's development, I only expect him to get better. I only expect Redondo to get better. So for me, that should be the starting midfield line. We brought Redondo with an actual role in mind. His first season was his development season, let's just say that. And second season, he should be starting. And I'm saying he should be starting not because of his quality, but because of his price tag. So I do think that's going to be our midfield three, and Sergio Busquets is going to play in that double pivot, which should suit this team, man. I think we played well when we've played those three together in recent games. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Mascherano does with those three.
Yeah, and how they build. Last year, they clearly wanted a high-end midfielder. They went after Christian Medina. They didn't get him. They ended up getting with Federico Redondo. That's a profile they really wanted in the midfield last year. And I don't know if it worked tremendously well, but that was clearly Tata's intention. I will be interested to see if Mascherano has different plans for the midfield and if they try and go out and get another midfielder to replace Diego Gomez or whatever.
If we don't compromise on our centre-back acquisition and we get a really high-quality centre-back who's very consistent and can be that lockdown defender, this midfield is absolutely going to thrive. The problem has always been that the midfield gets run over because they're too obsessed with doing their offensive duties, and our defense is not capable enough of handling and locking down everything by themselves. So get a good quality centre-back and you'll see these three actually flourish.
Rock says, do you guys really think Inter Miami has the best roster in MLS? I do.
On paper, yes. In practice, I don't think it was utilized in the best way, but on paper, yes.
I also think that if you watch other teams on a consistent basis, you see the holes in those rosters.
Yeah.
And so just like we see the holes in Inter Miami's roster, those are also apparent on other teams when you watch them consistently, but they don't have the kind of depth that Inter Miami has.
And can I say something controversial? Well, not that controversial.
No, so you can't. Save it for our next podcast.
Okay.
But go ahead.
No, so the fact that Inter Miami was able to win the Supporters' Shield, break that points record, is a testament to how well their roster has been constructed. The fact that we lost in the playoffs doesn't have to do with the roster itself, because a playoff game is a one-off. Any team can have a good day, any team can have a bad day, but the strength of depth actually comes into play over the course of the entire season, and that's why Inter Miami was able to actually get that points record and win the MLS Supporters' Shield.
Yeah, and it's so easy to tell. Leo Alfonso, winner at Philadelphia. Campana, winners at Toronto, winner versus DC United. Those types of games, when we didn't have Messi, when we didn't have Suarez, Julian Gressel steps up, Matias Rojas stepped up. Like, those types of moments are when the depth comes in, and you don't get 60-plus points if you don't have that kind of depth, much less 70-plus.
And people complain that some of these players are average or not as high quality. You're comparing those players to the best player in the league, in the world, Lionel Messi, to Luis Suarez, who's achieved everything in the world of football. Any other team would grab the opportunity with both hands to have this kind of roster. Our drop-off from our top four to the rest may be a little bit too much, but the rest of the squad across quality is actually very consistent and good quality MLS players. And having that many good quality MLS players is not a joke in one team.
Sean says, do you guys think we see more center back Boosie rather than him playing as a defensive midfielder with the emergence of Yannick Bright?
I think he plays actually a more forward role next season based on whoever we recruit for our center-back role. I think he's going to be a little bit more of a creative outlet because now he has Yannick Bright next to him to do all the dirty work. So I don't think we see him as an out-and-out CDM. I think we're going to see him as a floating midfielder.
I agree. I think he played center back as a necessity because we had a lot of injuries. Aside from Toto Aviles, everyone was injured. Christoph was in and out. Performances were up and down. Ryan Saylor performances were up and down. And then Frede in and out. And then David Martinez also in and out. So I think if we get 2 new center backs, which I expect or I'm hoping for, we're going to get at least one, and they are consistently healthy. Add that to Aviles, add that to David Martinez, and I think Inter Miami is going to be using Busquets in the midfield. And then, yeah, like you said, Yannick Bright is going to be his protection, which we saw he really needed early last season when we couldn't control the midfield when he was a part of it. So, yeah, I really like that. All right. Anything else before I break down what's coming next?
No, man, this was the last top 20 draft that we do for this season. Obviously, the season's come to a close, and I'm happy with our selections. I thought there were a few disagreements here and there, but overall, it went pretty smooth, and we didn't bite each other's heads off, which is always a good sign. So that means we'll be coming back for the next podcast, and hopefully after tomorrow, Mascherano's press conference gives us an insight into who's retained and who's not, and we can finally discuss that in our next podcast.
I actually, before we wrap this up, I want to go back to our draft. Here's the top 20. Who do you see having the biggest jump next year?
I'm going to say Federico Redondo.
Feels like the easy answer.
Yeah. Yannick Bright. There you go.
I don't think he's going to jump much higher than 5. I could see David Martinez coming in the top 10 next year.
Yeah, I can see him do that. Yeah.
Okay, guys, we are expecting Javier Mascherano to talk to the press tomorrow. That's going to happen. We're expecting the roster decisions for Chelo Wigan, Matías Rojas, Nico Frede, Franco Negri, guys like that to be announced over the next couple days. Those were due to the league last Wednesday, so they should be public any day now. And then on Thursdays, the Club World Cup draw. So we'll know who our opponents are going to be. So we'll come back Thursday night to talk about all of that stuff. But until then, unless there's any breaking news, I hope you guys have a wonderful night. We will see you then. And I missed you guys already. See you next time. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Do us a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. Since our first viewer, sharing this with you all has been the very best part. So from the beginning until the end, thank you for being a part of this and have a wonderful day.